Here's one. This is from Paul from South End on Sea. He says, my question is, in your prime, do you think you could have been a success in MMA/UFC? And he has a follow-up question, which I'll get to in a minute. Man, I tell you what, I'm a huge fan, MMA, UFC. I've been asked this question before, but to give you a straight-up answer, I think I would have had a good chin for it. I don't know if I'd have had a good anything else for it. The only time I ever got knocked out in my life, and I've been in a couple of car wrecks, never got knocked out. When I got dropped on my head, I never got knocked out. When I was wrestling The Undertaker in Madison Square Garden at Highway to Hell, when he bent over to give me a backdrop and I kicked him, and he straightened up and the back of his head caught me flush under the chin, right in that zone, and it flashed me. I went down, and that's when I was looking up at the Madison Square Garden ceiling, and Earl Hebner looked down at me and had that little smile on his face, and he says, God dang it, boy, you okay? And I said, where am I? He goes, that dang boy, you in the garden. And so I got knocked out there. So I think that was a hell of a damn shot. So I think I would have had a pretty good chin for the MMA/UFC. But, man, I've never taken any karate classes, no jiu-jitsu classes. I never had one single shoot wrestling lesson in my life. All I've known is college football, baseball, discus throwing. I didn't do any boxing. I've trained in boxing for a few months at a time. Wasn't extremely proficient at it. Always kept my hands down. Well, my right arm doesn't straighten out all the way, so that kind of cuts the range out in my right arm. But going back to my prime, I don't know if I'd have been worth a shit or not at MMA, UFC. All I can say is that I'm a good fan. I love the business. Just got finished texting Daniel Cormier. I know he's getting ready for a fight with Stipe Miocic coming up here on July 7th, and that's a fight that I'm really looking forward to. It's a sport that I really enjoy. It's a sport that's been interesting to watch evolve from the guys that were just pure strikers to the guys that were just pure wrestlers. And now all these years later, to see what it's morphed into, where, wrestling is still kind of, the bread and butter of it all, but the jiu-jitsu with the striking and the wrestling, that's all combined to become the hybrid art form that it is, or sport that it is. I used to love boxing. All of the great characters kind of disappeared from boxing. And now, UFC is kind of like so exciting, and anything can happen at any time with the kicking, the strikes, the chokes, just the art form that it is, and how deceptive some of these guys can be, and the skills that they bring. It's at a whole different level. So, I wouldn't have been successful at it, but I'm a huge fan and continue to watch it, and watch damn near every single pay-per-view they do and all the stuff on Fox Sports 1. But as a follow-up question, he says, hey, is there anyone from your prime time, not obvious, like a Kurt Angle, who you think could have cut it in the octagon? Well, and this is from Paul McKeon. Obviously Brock Lesnar has done what he's done, and I guess there's word or maybe rumor or maybe something that he might go have another fight in the UFC. I don't know. I know he just I thought he re-signed with WWE. But Brock obviously has done what he did. Kurt Angle, it would have been interesting to see what Kurt could have done, because he won the gold medal in the Olympics in 1996 with a broken neck. And obviously that means his wrestling skills are, premier. But as a striker, how would he have fared as a chin? What kind of chin does he have as far as trying to, take some blows that these guys are dishing out? I'll never forget when Kurt Angle broke into the business. I guess it was back in the late 90s, or was it 2000? Nonetheless, you just see this blue chip athlete, and the guy was an absolute blur, very aggressive, highly technical. He caught on to the business of pro wrestling faster than anybody I've ever seen. So had he applied himself to MMA and striking and jiu-jitsu and everything that went with it, he was so high level of a wrestler. I don't know why he could not have been high level at the striking and every other aspect of MMA, but obviously that's my speculation. as far as other guys. I mean, you had Ken Shamrock, but he was training for pro wrestling, got into MMA, then came back out of pro wrestling. And there's a guy who, like I said, many times before in the podcast, a guy who came out of a shoot business after being in a work business and come back to a shoot world as the legit toughest guy in the world, the baddest human being walking planet Earth. And it was Ken Shamrock. And I caught some words or lines from an interview he just did. And he initially had reservations about being the special guest referee when Brett and myself were going to have the submission match, because coming from that shoot world of MMA, he didn't want to be part of something that wasn't going to be able to hold up or, wasn't going to pass the test or make the grade. And obviously, we went out there and rocked the house and tore the joint down and executed a double turn. And Brett got his shit in. I got my shit in. I left as a baby. Brett left as a heel. And, Ken was a big part of that match. It's like I said when I was doing the podcast with Edge and Christian and Bret Hart talking about that match. I thought Ken brought a lot of star power to the match. Legit. He brought presence, just good-looking dude, jacked up. If there's anybody that could enforce the rules between two guys who are at a major angle that was built and ready to go, it was Ken Shamrock. He brought a lot of star power to the match, and from a different world, bringing those outside eyeballs. So obviously Ken did what he did in the world of MMA. And then when I think about the rest of the guys, there's been some... There's been a lot of tough-ass guys in the business of pro wrestling. But when you're in the gym or you're in the dojo or whatever they call it, and you're training like those MMA guys do, day in, day out, going through the grind, I mean, whether it's working on their grappling, their striking, their jiu-jitsu, but that's what you train to do, and you are a professional fighter, that's a whole different level. That's a whole different stratosphere. And when you're trained to entertain people like you are in the world of professional wrestling, some of the best athletes I've ever seen in my life came from, that were in the business of pro wrestling, came from the world of football. But football ain't fighting. And if you put a UFC guy in a football uniform, that doesn't really transfer. His skills in the octagon don't transfer to the gridiron. So, most of the guys' skills in the world of pro wrestling wouldn't transfer into what would go on in an octagon. Although many have said, and I've never seen him in action, but Haku/Ming was an absolute destroyer in his prime. Big ass hands, just tougher than all get out. And everybody will vouch to that. But, how he would have fared into a heavyweight match with one of the premier people in the octagon, I don't know. But out on the streets, everybody in the locker room respected him. And if you didn't know anything about him and you were about to start some shit with him in a bar, you were about to have your ass handed to you. And that's the bottom line. So anyway, I segued into a little bit of street fighting there, but no, man, I probably wouldn't have been worth a shit at it, but I'm a huge fan, and I'm looking forward to CM Punk's fight coming up here pretty quick. I'm looking forward to Stipe Miocic and DC, Daniel Cormier getting it on July 7th. Hopefully I get a chance to talk to DC before that fight, and that will be a fight where it'll be interesting because Daniel's coming up from light heavy to go back to being a heavyweight. And then there's Stipe, probably going to go down maybe as the greatest heavyweight fighter in the history of the UFC. So we'll find out. But that is going to be an interesting match, and it'll be one that